When one thinks of cheetahs, I think one thinks of Serengeti plains, one thinks of large open expanses where the super sprinter can come on to the fore. And certainly the Serengeti is a very good area for cheetahs. Cheetahs are found in other areas, and they're also found in arid regions. And so we spent, in 2006, we went back to the Kalahari for 6 years to see how cheetahs manage in this desert environment. And tonight I'd like to share with you some of the findings of our study and putting it in a framework of, do cheetahs prefer grassy plains to sandy deserts? And I will be making quite a lot of comparisons between what we found in the Kalahari and what our colleagues and fellow workers on cheetahs have found in the Serengeti. So the first thing which we found, which is perhaps quite interesting, is that when it comes to density, there's not much difference. Cheetahs occur at a density of about 0.9 per 100 square kilometers in the Kalahari, and not much more, 1.0 in the Serengeti. So they're living at pretty much the same densities in these two environments. One of the things we were very interested in and wanted to learn more about was the reproductive history and reproductive success of female cheetahs. And in order to do this, we had to radio collar a number of individuals so that we could locate them on a regular basis and follow their fortunes over time. Now, even with radio collars on, it's not that easy to find the cheetahs. They live in very large home ranges, up to 1,000 square kilometers. And at best, from the ground to ground tracking, you would pick up a signal from perhaps 5, 6, that sort of distance, kilometers. And so it often would take us several days to actually locate a cheetah. However, we were also assisted in our endeavors to find cheetahs by a number of friends who had flying machines of different, and they would come as often as possible. We tried to get one flight a month. It didn't always work out there, but they would come out and help us, and we could obviously get up high in the sky, so that's very good for tracking. You get a much better range and cover a large amount of ground. And so instead of taking 2 or 3 days to find one cheetah, we could find perhaps 4 or 5 in a couple of hours flying. And as you can see, we had a range of different, we had helicopters, we had motor gliders, we experienced a range of different flying machines. And we're very grateful to the battleurs and to our other friends who helped us so much in our endeavors. So what we were trying to do and what was important was we wanted to find each of our female cheetahs at least once a month in order to check up on whether they had cubs or not. And it's not easy to tell if a cheetah is pregnant. In fact, it's very difficult. But towards the end, as you can see with this female, you do see a large abdomen that's not being caused through a good meal. So we wanted to find, as I say, we wanted to find the cubs as soon as possible, as young as they can, while they were still in the den. We were very surprised to find the flimsy nature of the cheetah dens. These are 4 typical dens. The one on the top left just shows a bush, a grass bush, and that was where the cubs were hidden, or in a grass tuft there. Here again in a tuft, quite often under trees, shepherd's trees. But the cubs were very, very vulnerable, obviously, in these dens, and we always wondered why it is that cheetahs do choose such very susceptible layers for their cubs. Perhaps, you know, a lot of animals in the Kalahari particularly will use holes. They put the young down holes where they're much more secure. Perhaps the cheetah's build with its long legs doesn't make it very adept at getting underground. So, as I say, we wanted to find cubs as young as we could. And as you can see, at that age, these are cubs of a few days old. The eyes are still closed, and they are absolutely helpless. They are very, very vulnerable. And of course, the mother cannot stay with the cubs all the time. She has to go off and hunt and find food for herself. And so they are left alone for a long, long time. And so we would expect there to be quite a high mortality amongst the cubs during the early denning period. So what we've done here, we then have looked at the survival rate of the cubs for the first about 10 weeks of their lives to emergence. And as you can see, about 45% of cubs in the Kalahari survived. Less than half the cubs survived those first few months. And in the Serengeti, it was a lot lower. It was only 30% of the cubs survived. When we looked at the causes of death of the cubs, we find that predation is very important. But in the Kalahari, it is practically the most important. It's all, in fact, just about all the mortality was due to predation, whereas in Serengeti, it's a lot lower, it was 57%. This is a typical case of what we'd find. Those 5 cubs that I showed in the previous slide were at a of about 6 weeks. A leopard went in and killed the whole group, the whole litter. It was very often difficult to determine what the predator was, but if we lost the whole litter in one go, if we were there, you know, if there were 5 there today and they're gone tomorrow, we were pretty certain it was predation. If it had been another cause, such as illness or starvation or something, we would expect them to have died more slowly. So it's always been an issue to determine what these predators are. In the Serengeti, it's believed that lions are very important predators, but the actual times that it's been observed are few and far between. A lot of it is very circumstantial, but no doubt lions, leopard, and the hyenas are important predators. But I think what is more perhaps interesting and important is that there's a range of smaller carnivores and smaller predators that are undoubtedly also killing the cubs. Jackals, which are very prolific in the Kalahari, we had circumstantial evidence, we didn't actually, that they had killed cubs. Honey badgers have been seen carrying cheetah cubs, baby, very small cheetahs, and we also had circumstantial evidence for that. There's even a record in the Serengeti of a secretary bird killing a litter of cubs with their very powerful stamping legs. And we also had reason to believe that eagles would take the cubs. So there's a wide range of predators that these cheetah cubs are susceptible to. And obviously, as I say, in the den, when the mother's out hunting, they are very, very easy to kill. Another cause of mortality, which was important in the Serengeti, but not important at all in the Kalahari, was abandonment and exposure. Now, the reason for this is in the Serengeti, the cheetah females feed mainly on the migratory Thompson's gazelle. About 66% of their kills are gazelle, and the gazelles are migratory. So they move over very big areas, and the female cheetahs have to track the gazelle. When they are in a den, when they have very small cubs, if the gazelle happened to move, which can happen, away from the den, it becomes extremely difficult for the mother to be able to make a kill, get food, and get back to the den. And so we found that the Serengeti study found that quite a few cubs and litters were deserted. The mother go to the hunting ground, come back and feed her cubs. The Kalahari, on the other hand, with a much lower density of prey, the primary prey for the female cheetahs are steenbok, but they are sedentary. Although they're living at much lower densities, they're sedentary, they don't move around, and the mothers don't have to ever go too far in order to catch a steenbok. And so they don't have this long periods when they might be away from the den. They can come back to the den much more frequently. So that accounts for the difference in that form of mortality. At about 10 weeks of age, the cheetah females stops denning, she takes her cubs out, and as you can see, they are tiny at that stage and still very vulnerable. So what we find when we compare, again, the Serengeti with the Kalahari, at emergence, for the first 2 months after emergence, there's quite a drop-off in survival in the Kalahari, but a far bigger drop in the Serengeti. Almost 20% of the cubs die during that period of time. Now, one of the major differences between the Kalahari and the Serengeti is the ratio of lions and spotted hyenas to cheetahs. As you can see here, in the Serengeti, there are 76 lions and spotted hyenas to cheetahs, whereas it's only 2 to 1 in the Kalahari. And of course, the other feature of the Serengeti is this extremely open habitat. It may make cheetah cubs much more vulnerable to predation once they leave the den, because the predators can see them from miles away and they become very easy prey still after leaving the den. In the Kalahari, where habitat conditions are less open, with the undulating dunes and extensive shrub cover, they are far less obvious, and they're not so easy to find. And so we find that once they leave the den, the Kalahari cubs have a very high survival rate. From 4 months to adolescence, again, we can see in the Kalahari there's very little mortality, but still the highish mortality continues in the Serengeti, so that at the time of adolescence, of independence from the mother, only about 5% of cheetah cubs born in the Serengeti become adolescent. The Kalahari cheetahs do a lot better, 34%. Now, I'd like to, just a little anecdote about cubs and cub mortality. We had a situation where a mother cheetah had a 1-year-old cub, and one day we found them, and the cub was limping very, very badly on its left front foot. It had a very swollen left front foot there, and we were concerned about it. Now, one of the things we wanted to find out, well, what we did want to find out was, how did this injury result? What was the cause of this injury? If it had been hit by a car, if it was a human-induced factor, we would be obliged to intervene and to try and help the animal. However, Sandparks' policy, and we subscribe to that, was that if it's a natural factor, then we must not interfere. So we decided to try and find out the cause of this injury, and we took the tracks of the cheetahs with our Bushman tracker, and we went back on the tracks, and close by we found that she had caught a steenbok. And so we thought, well, maybe this cub was running, its getting was quite big, it was starting perhaps to help or try and learn to hunt, and perhaps it was running with the mother and had fallen into a hole and hurt its foot. But we couldn't find any evidence of that. When we found the skull, it was a male steenbok, we noticed that one of the horns had broken off, and I looked at it and examined it and saw that that was a very fresh break. And on closer inspection, I saw there were some hairs sticking out in the horn. I hope you can see them on the photograph. And DNA analysis showed us that the hairs were from a cheetah. So what we believe happened was that The mother perhaps caught the young the steenbok, and then the cub came in and as they do, tried to learn to kill and probably grab the steenbok, and the little steenbok obviously was struggling, and it must have pierced the leg and broken, the bit of the horn was broken off in the leg. So it was a natural injury, and we could not interfere. Now, this cub was severely handicapped, and we didn't think there was much chance that it would survive. Anyway, we left it, and we came back a few days later, and this photo was taken then. And as you can see, it's still limping badly, but it did have quite a full stomach. So obviously the mother was still with it. She would wait for it. She moved and she'd made a kill, and the cub had a good meal. So that was a bit encouraging, but as I say, it was still very handicapped. The next time we came back about 2 weeks later, we were again surprised to see they were still together. The cub was still limping, but was obviously a lot better. And about a month afterwards, it was almost completely recovered. And in fact, 6 weeks after receiving the injury, the cub became independent, left its mother, and we subsequently saw it several times on its own, and it looked perfectly healthy. So I think that's a very good lesson to us to show how resilient animals are in nature, and that we might want to interfere at times, but probably it's not better not to. We are, again, it's survival of the fittest. This animal obviously was resilient and had the right genes. And so we let natural selection take its place. And I believe that's how we should do it. That's the right thing. Anyway, let's get back now to our comparison between the Kalahari and the Serengeti. Here we've got some demographic features of the two populations. The first one is aged independence. So in the Kalahari, it's about 19 months. Serengeti cheetahs become independent slightly earlier than their counterparts in the Kalahari. And perhaps it's more important for the cubs, the cheetah cubs in the Kalahari, to spend more time with their mother, learning hunting, because it's probably going to be in some ways much more difficult to hunt when they get older. Prey is much scarcer. Age at first reproduction, interesting enough, is considerably different. So Serengeti cheetahs, females are reproducing much earlier than Kalahari ones. The interbirth interval is not much difference between the two species, between the two populations. What is quite important and is significant is the litter size at independence. For Kalahari, it's about 2.7, and Serengeti a lot lower, 2.1. So again, it seems that Kalahari cheetahs, although they take longer over it, may be more successful in bringing up cubs. We also looked at what we call lifetime reproduction success in the two areas. In other words, how many cubs does a female raise to independence in the two regions? And the average for the Kalahari is 3.5, and the average for the Serengeti is 1.7. So there again, lifetime reproductive success in the Kalahari is higher than in the Serengeti. Then we looked at the ratio of females that raised 5 or fewer cubs to those that raised 6 or more. Now, what that means is that if that ratio is low, as it is in the Kalahari, then it suggests, or it shows that lots of females are raising more than 6 cubs in their lives. If the ratio is very high, as it is in the Serengeti, it suggests that very few females are producing lots of cubs. And that might have an influence in the genetic lineages. So in the Kalahari, where females leave surviving offspring more than they do in the Serengeti, in the Serengeti, we have these potential genetic lineages being lost. And this could have an effect on the effective genetic population size. In other words, the health, the genetic health of the populations and the diversity. And in fact, the genetic studies have suggested that Kalahari cheetahs are more diverse than they are in the Serengeti, which suggests that they will be better adapted or adapting to any changes in the environment. One of the important parameters that cheetahs particularly are is seen to be a factor for them is what is called this lovely word kleptoparasitism. And basically kleptoparasitism means when someone takes your kill away, they are kleptoparasitizing you. And cheetahs are meant to lose a lot of kills to other larger carnivores such as lions and hyenas. And again, we find in the Kalahari, it's pretty low. They only lost about 6% of their kills, but even in the Serengeti, it's not that high. It's 12%. And I think one of the most important ways in which cheetahs avoid kleptoparasitism, avoid losing their kills to large carnivores, is by hunting in the day. I think that's a very important reason why they hunt in the daytime, because the lions and the hyenas are much more likely to be going around and finding them at night. And indeed, we found that most of the kills that the Kalahari cheetahs lost were kills that they either made at night or were feeding at night when they lost them. Now, in the Serengeti, the largest and numerically dominant carnivores contribute the major share of prey animals killed across a wide range size. So in the Serengeti, in the Kruger as well, in a lot of these rich, large carnivore areas where lions and hyenas have high densities, they are the dominant predators. They, across the board, from the small to the big. And the smaller predators, and in this case, we're talking about the cheetah, does not play nearly as important a role in predation and in regulating prey numbers as the larger carnivores do. However, one of the keystone species, ungulate species in the Kalahari, the diminutive steenbok, is preyed upon very heavily by cheetahs. Cheetahs are the dominant predator on steenbok. In fact, we calculated that cheetahs remove approximately 46% of the steenbok population per annum. So they are the regulatory effect on steenbok. Now, you might think that that is just too many and that they will be, the population should not be able to stand that offtake. But these little animals are incredibly well developed and adapted to predation. They breed throughout the year. They can breed at any time of the year. A female can have her first lamb at 6 months of age, and an adult female can produce lambs about 8 months apart. So their very high reproductive potential is obviously geared towards withstanding what could be construed as a very high predation pressure. In the Kalahari, cheetahs also have a very important impact on springbok lambs, and we reckon that they removed about 80% of the annual springbok lamb crop. But again, springbok have a very high reproductive potential and reproductive rate, and they too can withstand that type of predation pressure. As far as adults are concerned, they remove a lot smaller percentage of the population, about 25% of the population, but then there are other predators also preying on springbok, animals like leopards and lions and well, particularly those two. But we think that cheetahs might have another influence on springbok. Springbok in the Kalahari, in the park, in the Kalahari Transfrontier Park, are really confined to the two dry riverbeds that run through them. If you look at the densities of springbok in the dunes, it's 0. In the riverbeds, it's 21.5. Steenbok, on the other hand, are mainly in the dunes at a much lower density, surely, but very widely spread. Steenbok are the most common of all the antelope in the Kalahari. So why don't springbok go into the dunes? Well, this was what we think might be happening. So even though cheetahs are the fastest predator mammals on Earth, they still have to get pretty close to their prey to catch them. And we found that with steenbok, a cheetah had to get to within 20 meters of a steenbok in order to have in order to be successful. If it charged from 26, which was the mean charge from unsuccessful hunts, it was not able to catch it. In the dry riverbed, where it's much more open, cheetahs could catch a springbok from 50 meters and be successful. So we are saying, we are suggesting that if springbok went into the dunes, cheetahs would be able to get much closer to them because there's much more cover, and would have a major impact on them. So we call this a landscape of fear. It seems that the springbok, there may be food in the dunes for them, but the risk of predation by cheetahs is probably so high that they avoid going into those dune areas. So I think we've shown that cheetahs are very well adapted to survive in arid systems. And I think what's also very important is that it is not always valid to extrapolate from one area to another. We tend to think what we find in the Serengeti, for example, is what cheetahs do. But of course, every habitat and environment is different, and the cheetahs have to adapt and are able to adapt and behave differently to these different environments. If we look at the distribution of cheetahs in Africa, the brown is the historical distribution, the yellow is the present distribution. It's very interesting to see that most of the areas that cheetahs are found in today are fairly arid areas. The southern part of Southern Africa, the Kalahari in Namibia, and up in Niger and into Algeria. And even the last remnants of the Asiatic cheetah are found in very arid regions in Iran. So cheetahs really are well adapted to arid regions, probably as well as any of the other large carnivores, except the brown hyena. So one of the possibilities from this is that if climate change is going to lead to more aridity, cheetahs may be better able to deal with these changes than some other large carnivore species. So cheetahs perhaps are going to be able to outlast a lot of other carnivores if things get very, very arid. I'd like to just finish up by a little commercial. If anyone is interested, we have published a scientific book on our study on the cheetahs called Kalahari Cheetahs, Adaptation to an Arid Region, which was published by Oxford University Press. We also have a natural history guide to the arid Kalahari, which is a much broader view of the Kalahari and the animals and the natural history of it. And then we've also published our book on hyenas, Hyena Nights and Kalahari Days. So if anyone is interested, you're welcome to send Margie an email at margsmills@gmail.com, and we would be very happy to help you get hold of any of these books should you wish to do so. Thank you very much.
Gus, thanks. Very interesting talk. Just interested when you mentioned the Asiatic cheetah, and obviously, I mean, the population is very threatened and it's under pressure, and I believe even the prey species is a problem there. But do you have any information or data Now, also obviously a desert environment. It seems extremely harsh. I'd just be interested to know, would you expect similar type of population densities, survival rates, what you saw in the Kalahari, or was it a completely different environment?
Yeah, no, sure. The prey base, even at the best of times in those very arid areas, is low, and it's even lower now. So I think the important thing is that they can survive in these areas and they can have viable populations in these areas. I think we sometimes get too fixed on numbers and densities. I don't think that's so important. The important thing is that the population must be genetically viable, and it can survive at low densities. And in fact, that's what cheetahs do, even in the best of places. Wild dogs are another one. So yes, I think traditionally, all the Northern Africa and those very arid regions in Asia would have held viable populations. The Iranian situation is, as you say, very dire. There's been a lot of work, a lot of effort by the Iranians. I'm fortunate enough to go there twice. A lot of effort being put in to try and do something about these animals, but they don't seem to be really getting, the numbers don't seem to be going up. They don't seem to have had much reproduction either. Perhaps the density has dropped so low that it's very difficult for them to find each other. I don't know. But yeah, where that population is very victorious.
Thank you, Dr. Mills. And Chris, take note, one of the classic lectures we've just had, it's one of those that one would really like to offer much more broadly to institutions. My question is, at the landscape level, do you have a floating population? I know of farms at Groot Dagbreek, up in Namibia, where between 8 and 15 cheetah are shot every year. Where do they come from? So in fairly wide open areas, do you find that there are sort of core animals that are restricted to their vast habitats, and then over and above that, there's a floating population? How do they get around? Do they constantly move?
Namibia is a very, very interesting. There are some very interesting studies being done in both North and South Namibia, and there certainly are a lot of cheetahs there. And as you say, although the researchers and the conservationists, CCF, work very hard to try and get the farmers to be more tolerant towards the cheetahs, I think they've had a certain amount of success there. I think, in fact, most cheetahs in the world are in that southern part of Southern Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa. The Kalahari just gets the tail end of that. But that area there is probably got 2/3 of the world's cheetahs.
Thanks, Gus, for an interesting talk. Gus, you mentioned here towards the end that increased heredity, as predicted by global change, might favor potentially the cheetahs. One of the things that we see a lot in savannas, and that's concerning for a lot of people, is bush encroachment. And there's mounting evidence that bush encroachment is caused by higher atmospheric carbon dioxide that favors the woody component to the grassy component. So my question to you is, how do you think that would play out for cheetahs? If I understood your presentation correctly, the little bit more cover in the Kalahari might be beneficial for them there. But then on the other hand, one always sort of associates cheetahs with these wide open areas. So do you think changes in bush cover might be a concern or advantage under future conditions? Thanks.
Thanks, Isak. Yeah, is a very interesting question, and I know again, Laurie Marker from Cheetah Conservation Fund in Northern Namibia, she is very concerned about the bush encroachment, which they think is happening there, and had even gone into programs of doing bush clearing there. But, you know, I'm not sure. These animals are adaptable, and even in Kruger, where we watch cheetahs in pretty thick bush, their hunting strategy is very different. In the Kalahari, you know, hunting a thing like a steenbok is very much a sit and wait. They'll sit on top of a dune and scan until they see one. In Kruger and in the thicker bush areas, they're much more on the moving the whole time. And sometimes we'll just sort of come onto a steenbok, and often will catch it in a very short chase. So yeah, it is, you know, the cheetah is known obviously as this fantastically fast animal, but perhaps even being fast over 20 meters is important because of the acceleration that they can catch the prey. I don't know, but that's, you know, the sort of my comment anyway.
Thanks very much for the very interesting talk. I seem to kind of remember from, you know, when cheetah numbers were initially dropping. I mean, it was obviously habitat destruction that was forcing them, their numbers to drop. But I think there was always the threat of lack of genetic diversity and inbreeding that potentially was going to be the final decline of cheetahs. Now, if I look at the map that you presented, there's so many little islands not joined together where I would understand that cheetahs don't have a viable population to continue breeding because the genetic diversity is just so limited. I'd just be interested, are we seeing sort of negative mutations and that sort of thing happening to the population where they're becoming much weaker and numbers dying out? Not actually through habitat destruction, but the numbers are just not sustainable. And is the bigger island, as you mentioned, across sub-Saharan South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and is that a big enough area? And with international boundaries, I know there are international peace parks that do cross them, but do you actually get the numbers crossing from country to country?
Yeah, Marty, so the cheetah, as you rightly said, was regarded as being what was termed genetically depauperate. And the hypothesis was that they went through a genetic bottleneck many years, I can't remember exactly how long ago, when the population declined to a very small number. And so the genetic base for redevelopment and reintroduction or redistribution of the species was limited. And this was in the 1970s. That work had a very big impact. But there were a lot of problems that have been seen now that we know a lot more about genetics and there's been more genetic work done. It doesn't seem, at least a lot of geneticists believe, that the cheetah is no more depauperate, genetically inbred than any other species. And in fact, there is absolutely no evidence in any wild populations of being more susceptible to disease or bad genes. The one thing you do get is a thing called the kinky tail. I don't know. Cheetahs do often, well, not often, but there's a reasonable high percentage of cheetahs who have a kink in their tail. And that was suggested to be a sign of inbreeding. And that's the only, as far as I know, the only real tangible evidence for it. So the question of small populations, of course, is just as important for any other species. I don't think the cheetah is any more susceptible to that than any other mammalian population, carnivore population.
Thanks for the great talk.
Hi, Matthew, nice to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. I was wondering if you felt that the population in Kalahari was actually increasing, and if it was increasing, were the younger leopards dispersing outside of the park, possibly onto neighbouring farmlands? And did you ever experience any cases of human-wildlife conflict whilst working up
there? Okay, I don't, you know, I don't think the population is necessarily increasing at all. I think populations fluctuate, and I think the Kalahari population is a pretty well contained population. So whether, you know, perhaps we were there at a good time, the numbers were going up for some reason, but I don't think there's any evidence or any reason to believe that it's an onward, you know, it's a population that's increasing. It'll fluctuate up and down. As to what happens to cheetahs, yeah, look, all mammals can move far. Dispersion of subadults, as you know, is a very, very difficult thing to study. We didn't have any satellite collars on, and sample sizes are very difficult and so on. We certainly got cheetahs coming and going. We sometimes saw, cheetahs disappeared. Other times we got cheetahs coming in that we never saw, maybe only saw them once or twice and never saw them again. So I think that whole southern Botswana, Namibia, Kalahari area is linked to some extent. It must be. And as far as any conflict with livestock is concerned, you know, that's always going to be there. That's always going to be an issue with, as I say, with carnivores everywhere. And I very strongly believe that we really need to focus on securing natural populations, and that trying to conserve animals outside of protected areas, particularly carnivores, in many cases is probably not the best way to spend your funding. That's my feeling.
Gus, thanks a lot once again. Just as you are, interesting man, interesting talks. Just a question. We do know that the lion in the Kalahari differs slightly from, for argument's sake, Kruger, albeit by color. Does the cheetah in the Kalahari differ from Kruger, Serengeti, or any of the other ones in any way?
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah, that is an interesting question. The Kalahari cheetah, it's to do with size, really. Size. Kalahari cheetahs are quite small, but it's certainly smaller than Kruger cheetahs, I think, from the measurements, and I think Namibian cheetahs, or northern Namibian cheetahs. But they're smaller than Serengeti cheetahs in size. So the size thing is quite an interesting question, and I'm really not sure what is going on. With males too, we find that cheetahs, sometimes males, you probably know, form coalitions. So they are very unusual in cats, that they sometimes go together or in permanent groups of 2 or 3, and others are solitary. And we found that the solitary ones are quite a bit smaller than the coalition ones. The coalition ones kill larger prey, so that may explain it, and they get more food than the solitary ones. So size is a very interesting question, and we still don't know much about it.
I was very surprised to hear about the secretary bird attacking the cheetah pups. And why? Are they threatened by them? Is it part of their diet?
The secretary bird,
yes.
Did you say? Yes. Look, yeah, I think it's food. I think that was probably, you know, secretary birds will eat mice and small mammals, and I suppose they come. This was a record from the Serengeti of them going into a den and stomping the chicks, the cubs. So yeah, I don't think it's because they're scared of them. It's because they want to eat them.
I'd also like to thank Gus for an amazing talk. I've had to do with, or I've heard about reintroduction of captive bred cheetahs onto different farms and into parks as well. How successful is that?
I suppose the short answer is I don't know how successful it is. Reintroduction of captive raised carnivores is always going to be a controversial subject. I personally don't think it's necessary. I think there are enough, if you needed to reintroduce cheetahs into an area, there probably are enough wild cheetahs that one could move around, particularly in South Africa with the small fenced reserves and so on. So, but yeah, I think it's not impossible that they could adapt and it could be successful.
Hi Gus, hi everyone. Thanks Gus for an absolutely fascinating talk. I really enjoyed all the science and all the anecdotes as well. Just from a drinking point of view, were the frequencies of drinking water actually looked at? You have cheetahs living in arid areas, in the savanna areas. Does the one in savanna decide it's a cheetah and it doesn't need a lot of water, so it's just going to walk past? Or is there opportunity drinking at every occasion? Thanks.
So the bottom line is, and as I've said before, any animal that lives in the Kalahari is independent of water. They do not need to drink water. And the carnivores are no different. And carnivores get their water from the prey, from the blood and the meat of their prey. They do not need to drink. If there's water available, they will drink it. What we found, even lactating females, we found did not drink or did not need to drink. They could survive perfectly well. So the question of water provision, as we all know from Isaac's talk the other night, is controversial. Personally, I think Kalahari would be better off without water holes from a natural point of view, although I don't think they have a very big influence there, because the animals simply don't need water. And in fact, if I can go a bit further, so the Gemsbok, for example, when they go to the water holes, if you look at them carefully, they're not drinking. They're actually licking the salts that are around the water holes.
Fascinating.
The sort of second half of my question, with the bigger island that goes from Namibia to Botswana into Zimbabwe and South Africa, where you've got that whole yellow portion where cheetahs are found, I understood from the answer that you gave to Eddie, there is a bit of a size difference between the two. Is there actually breeding going on of cheetah that are moving from one side to the other? Is there any sort of DNA checking or anything that's done that, sees that there's cheetah that were in Kruger that have gone across to Botswana because there are links, or are the fences up that stop that? And then just an observation, if I can, after that, just tell you a story of a cheetah that I saw at Mabula, where they were hunting. Now, I know they've been introduced there, and there aren't the other carnivores, but they actually were hunting at night. And they took down a Gemsbok, and the two cheetah were chased off their kill by a brown hyena, and then the brown hyena were chased off by buffalo because the Gemsbok had been making such a noise, and then the cheetah went back, and eventually the brown hyena took it away. But that hunting at night, we find it very strange for cheetah. And another time that we've seen the cheetah at Mabula, they were hunting at night. So I presume that, as you mentioned, they don't normally hunt at night if there are other carnivores, but they seem to be quite comfortable hunting at night where there weren't lions present. So just a comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. That's very, very true. In fact, they do hunt at night, particularly males, a lot more than one realizes. And there are two species that seem in the Kalahari that seem to be really important prey for male or cheetahs. One are spring hares. So spring hares are only out at night. And the thing about a spring hare, though, is that it's nice and small. And if you catch it, you can eat it very quickly. And so the chances of something else coming along are less. The other thing that they seem to hunt at night are ostriches. And we're not quite sure what's going on there, but several times we found that they had killed ostriches at night, whereas they didn't often kill them in the day. So, yes, they do kill it. They do kill at night. Sometimes in the Kalahari too, they are forced to go into the night when it's been very hot, and their time of hunting is less. But it is the time, if they're going to lose kills, it's almost always going to be at night. I can't. We have no. There's no evidence or no knowledge on whether any cheetahs have, how far they've moved and how far they can, might move. But animals do move and can move, I think, a lot further than we give them credit for often.